Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. Today, I'm here with my co-host, Amy Hollenkamp. Woo! And
Hey.
I'm Nikki Dineza, and we are going to talk about food, fear, and nutrition dogma, and just some really important issues in the world of IBS and SIBO particularly. So with that being said, hey, Amy, what's up?
Hey, Nikki. I'm pumped for this topic. Food
It's a
fears and
biggie.
some of the diet dogma that's out there in the IBS space is definitely a huge obstacle that I deal with all the time with my clients, and it really can prevent moving forward in your gut healing. So I'm super pumped to be able to talk about it with you today.
Yeah, I think it has just so much overlap. You know, we could talk about restricted eating and food fear from a perspective of what it does to your microbial community and how that will really mess with your diversity and potentially starve some good bacteria. And also, just like, I don't know, I think it's okay to enjoy your food. And that's part of the experience of food. And the mental anguish and the anxiety and the fear that goes with that is just not good for your gut brain axis and your vagus nerve. And you kind of need those things to keep your gut going. So there's a lot of angles that we could talk about this from, but I will kick it off first to the registered dietitian in the house with, let me ask you this, as a dietitian in your training, what sort of nutritional templates were you advised to use with your irritable bowel syndrome patients? And what was that conversation that dietitians are getting in dietetic school? And then what have you seen, with clients who have come to you? And then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. With dietetic school, the main template that's used for IBS is the popular low FODMAP diet. That's mainly what we were trained on. And I say trained, it was probably like a day that we learned about low FODMAP.
Yeah.
But low
So not
FODMAP,
every nutritionist or dietitian is adequately equipped to help you with that, first and foremost. But continue.
yeah, exactly. I mean, with low FODMAP, that's definitely something that we were trained to use as a short-term tool to help people with IBS figure out what their triggers were. So really, in terms of how it's taught and traditionally how it's used, low FODMAP was really meant to be a short-term elimination of every FODMAP food and then a slow introduction of those foods back into your diet. So that's really what low FODMAP was meant to do. What I typically see people doing now are a little bit of misusing and abusing low FODMAP to where
Absolutely.
they're staying on it for life. Sometimes they're advised to stay on it for life by their doctor. Not as often dietitians, but a lot of practitioners will just say, you know what, you're going to have to be on low FODMAP forever. And I'll be very clear, that was never the intent of the diet. And being on low FODMAP can create a lot of issues long term. So I wouldn't advise that. So that's generally what I'm seeing or what is taught in the traditional space. In terms of what I see my clients coming to me on, there's a lot of different, I feel like it's maybe starts as low FODMAP and then it gets even more restrictive from there. A lot of my clients will start with low FODMAP and that puts in their head that the food is driving their symptoms. So when they go low FODMAP and then they still have symptoms, they think, well, I must be eating something that's driving my symptoms. So then they go down this rabbit hole of continued restriction. So maybe they start thinking it's a histamine issue or a carb issue, or any other food that you could think of. People can start to connect the dots in some way in their heads that this is what's driving the symptoms. Sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it's not. So I can be clear about that. But I think it's definitely the clients that I see have gone down the low FODMAP rabbit hole into something even more restrictive than that. I think we were talking about it when we were prepping for this. The SCD low FODMAP combo I see a lot.
Yep.
And a lot of times, again, I'm just seeing clients eating, 10 foods. So then, I don't know what diet that's called other than extremely restrictive. It's not really even low FODMAP or SCD or the combo of the two. It's really just very restrictive.
Yeah, it's just its own kind of game at that point.
Yeah. And it sounds like, too, when we were talking, you're seeing very similar clients. What kind of diets are your clients coming to you with?
A lot FODMAP. And I've been a pretty outspoken critic of low FODMAP for quite some time. And that was actually one of my things that started me with YouTube. That was my number 2 SIBO mistake when I did my original series years ago. Number 1 is treating SIBO as though it's the root cause or as though it's the only thing, because you don't just get SIBO out of nowhere. You don't just get dysbiosis out of nowhere. So that was number 1. But number 2 was low FODMAP, because I think, I've always been concerned with what it will do to the microbiome and to your level of inflammation as a whole. If you start disrupting the microbiome and lowering, your bifidobacteria and Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, which are both, every study I've looked at in humans where they look at the microbiome change with low FODMAP, those two are consistently lower on low FODMAP.
Yeah, for sure.
Every single study. And it's like, you start wiping out some of these good bacteria or taking them down a notch at least. Well, now you don't have short chain fatty acids. You don't have enough butyrate, and that's going to net you more inflammation. And then your motility is not going to work, and your digestive juices and everything kind of goes to shit.
Yeah.
So I've been worried about that, but that's what I see more commonly. I see a lot of people who are doing low FODMAP, not quite as much the combo in this day and age, but I also get a lot of people who are doing low histamine.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not. I work an awful lot with mast cell disease and allergenic presentation, so I'm very familiar with that also. But it's you start combining, you're like, well, I'm doing AIP and low histamine and low FODMAP, and you literally have 2 foods that you can eat. And I see a lot of those people, and I think that one of the things is that people often believe, and practitioners too, will believe that it's the elimination, it's the subtractions that are intrinsically healing. So I'll see somebody who has Hashimoto's and SIBO. So they're like, okay, if I restrict the FODMAPs, that will heal SIBO.
Yeah.
And if I go AIP and eliminate all of those foods, that will heal the Hashimoto's. So they're now doing a combination of AIP and low FODMAP. And it's like, that the restrictions aren't healing you.
Yeah.
You can't starve your way to good health. You need to add something or do something on top of that. And I think it's a really slippery slope going down this place of will restricting food help me once? Maybe restricting more foods will help me more. And I certainly was on that path as well. I think we talked about it in the last podcast where I basically tried to con my friend into running an IgG sensitivity test on me, because I was like, all right, I feel better cutting out gluten, dairy, and sesame, but maybe there's a couple of other foods and I could get the rest of the way there. And I definitely experienced that from my own perspective as well. And it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. A couple things to add on what you said. So I'm also extremely concerned about bifido levels with the clients I work with. So it's interesting because low FODMAP has been shown to lower bifido levels, and also studies show that people with IBS already have low bifido levels. So you're potentially making the matter worse by going low FODMAP, especially long term. So I think that's a really interesting thing. Plus, most people with IBS, or in some of the studies I've seen, have lower diversity. So if you're cutting foods out, you're just going to lower your diversity even further. Again, these diets long term can create lots of dysfunction in the microbiome, lots of issues. And then also to add, in terms of what you're talking about, I sort of like to refer to it as diet stacking. When you're stacking all these diets on top of each other, let alone the effects it's going to have on the microbiome and on your health and maybe on nutrient deficiency risk, but just the stress of having to maintain such a limited food list is really counterproductive to healing. The emotional side of it, the lifestyle side of it, just quality of life is awful. And then like your whole life revolves around trying to maintain this diet that's actually probably not helpful long term. So again, if it was really something that healed the gut and all the problems would go away if you stuck to the diet, if that promise was actually a reality, which it's not, but if it was true, then again, it might make sense to devote so much time and energy into the diet. But it's not. It's going to create more dysfunction long term, and there has to be a switch. Like I always tell my clients, you cannot starve your gut forever and expect it to heal. You have to make that switch from a starvation mentality to a repair and rebuild mentality. If you can never make that switch, you're always going to have like some dysfunction in there.
And it's hard to do. And I do want to take a second and just say, like, you know, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, but I follow some on social media. But I've seen this pop up, and I always tell my patients that it's not that any of this is illogical. Like the brain and your nervous system is just taking in information from the world around you, making sense of patterns, and then trying to predict things based on those patterns. So it makes complete sense from like a computer algorithm point of view and how the brain works. It makes sense that you felt better when you cut out a food and your brain deduced it was the food that was the problem.
Yeah.
Like that is totally logical. It's like if you experience pain when you put your hand on a burner on the stove, your brain will correctly deduce that the problem was that you put your hand on a damn burner on the stove. And it's like, it's not, you know, I don't want to approach this, and I know you're not, but I always tell people, like, don't approach it from like, like bad person. Why are you thinking those bad, dumb things? It's like, it's totally logical, but we're here to tell you that's not the reality of it. Like your perception is not the reality necessarily.
Yeah.
And ultimately you do have to feed your critters because they will find food at some point. There's been some data at least that suggests if you don't feed your bacteria, they'll just munch on your mucus.
Yeah.
Or they'll munch on bits of you. As long as you have a human body, they will always have food.
Yeah.
As horrifying as that is. And you're better off feeding them, you know, apples and onions and whatever else.
You're totally right. I think like there should never be shame around what you've done diet-wise either. I think anytime there's shame and judgment, so like when I work with clients, like I think judging yourself really harshly around what you've done and where you've been is not the right way to go. I think you're totally right. There's a positive feedback loop that you get with cutting out of food and feeling better. That's really hard to break. I think eventually there's like a limiting rate of return on that stuff where like, okay, there's only so much cutting that's helpful. And it's knowing sort of when adding in foods would actually help. And it is a hard line to draw, what you're saying, when you've already established those pathways of success from cutting. So yeah, you're 100% right about that. And there's a lot of like, I think from my standpoint, it's getting out of seeing external sources as being like the best way to figure out what's working for your body, and cluing back in on like, how are you responding to foods? Not like what a list is telling you, like that you shouldn't be eating, but are you able to tolerate these foods? Like then they're fine. Maybe you have to start slowly and add them back in like you know, a sixth of a serving at a time and see how you do. But really, I think one thing that I love doing is helping my clients figure out how to actually listen to their body again, instead of all the noise of every single dieter. I always tell my clients too, you could find anyone that would be upset with like any food that you're eating.
Oh, completely.
Yeah, you could pick a food out of the list and you could find someone who might have credentials that would tell you not to eat said food. So it really comes down to figuring out like what foods are working for your body, because you're the only you. So what works for you is not going to work for the next person. I think really allowing yourself to experiment, which a lot of people are a little freaked out of in the gut health space.
Yeah.
But I do think if you can allow yourself to experiment, and that can take some time and trial and error and building up the wrapping your head around it, I think is hard to get back into the experimental realm. But I do think that that's really key. Do you find that like a lot of your clients are a little bit scared to experiment with different
Terrified.
foods? Yeah.
Yeah. And I will 100% point the finger at my own profession for this.
Yeah.
I really am quite annoyed with the functional medicine world, naturopaths. I mean, anybody in like the integrative medicine space, I think has royally effed this up for a lot of years.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll tell you, even when I first started going to functional medicine seminars, that was the conversation. That was almost the entire conversation, is cutting stuff out. And that can serve people really well. Like, that's how I learned that I have celiac disease and I have to cut out gluten. Fair enough. Like, that was totally value to me. But, you know, it sends you on this goose chase, and there needs to be more of a conversation where, like you said, there's a limited amount of return. But I remember, heck, when I practiced in Tempe, Arizona, I got a lot of patients who first would go to the naturopathic medical school, and they would go to the naturopathic student clinic. And I kid you not, every single one of those people would come in with a Genova IgG food sensitivity test. And every one of those people, looking back, like, they would have a list of 30 foods and they were told, you can never eat these again.
Yeah.
And everybody told me the same story. And I just had a call this week with a lady, and she was like, yeah, I got one of those tests to get any sense. She's like, I was reactive to like blueberries and lettuce, and I cracked up on the phone. I was like, I'm so sorry, not to be rude. Blueberries and lettuce are always the two that I use as examples when I talk about how shitty these tests are. And they, you know, they go around with like a printed list that they have to bring to every restaurant. And, you know, we could talk about the merit of food sensitivity testing in another episode, but very frequently the food fear is there largely because of the integrative medicine profession. And I've seen that time and time again, either with food sensitivity tests or the people who are treating SIBO who don't know what they're doing. And they're telling patients with the best of intentions, if you eat a FODMAP, you will feed the SIBO and it will win. It's like, oh my God, that's terrifying. Or, you know, you can never eat a morsel of sugar again, or you will feed the candida and you'll never get rid of the candida. And you're like, oh my God. It makes you feel like you have this creepy roommate that you can't do anything about. And I think that that's the root of a lot of this food fear crap for a lot of people. And I apologize on behalf of my profession, because the functional medicine profession has the best of intentions, but they've royally effed stuff up for a while on that front.
Yeah, no, I love that you're talking about this. It definitely gets me fired up too, because again, like, I hear the same stories from my clients where they say, you know, my doctor said if I eat like one piece of an onion, like I'm screwed.
Game over. And
my SIBO is going to be back. And I'm like, how terrifying is that?
Absolutely.
And I also see mismanagement in the conventional GI space as well. So I would like to touch a little bit on that. Sometimes they just don't emphasize diet at all. So like, that's probably a factor, but a lot of times they know enough to be a little bit dangerous.
I'd agree.
So they're passing along these lists of yes and no food with no guidance.
Yeah. And
telling, you know, people they have to be on low FODMAP forever.
Yeah, like, good luck.
Which was never the intention, or which was never the intention of the low FODMAP diet. That's not how it's supposed to be used, even by the conventional dietitians. So that's a real bummer for me. And I think it just creates a lot of food fear that's hard to overcome. I also think just in general, it places so much value on the food that you can't invest energy anywhere else. Like, when your whole focus is on the food piece and all your energy, I mean, we have limited energy to invest in things. So if the diet's so limited, all that energy is going into the food and what you're eating and what you're cooking and You know, I'll talk to people all the time and they're sleeping like 5 to 6 hours and they're stressed to the max and they're not doing stress management and they're
their vagus
not
nerve is
really
fried to a
moving
crisp.
and
Yeah.
exactly, they're not, their nervous system's overwhelmed. Like, it's just, it's a real bummer because there's such a lack of focus on other really key areas, probably equally as important as the diet piece, in my opinion.
If not more.
Yeah, so to me, there's just such a lack of attention on other key bases because the diet has to become, you know, where you're spending 90% of your energy instead of being able to diversify where you're spending your energy in your healing journey, which I think the more multi-dimensional and multifaceted your approach is, what I've seen, the better the results.
Yeah.
So that's a really key point too. It's just like there's a level of you need to loosen the reins on the diet a little bit in order to even focus on other areas that are key to moving forward in the gut health, in your gut health journey.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you were saying, if you're spending umpteen hours a day, you know, cooking and planning and meal planning and prepping and eating and like cooking separate meals for you and your family and choosing specific restaurants because your friends want to go out and you have to just choose the exact same one restaurant that you know you're safe at. It's like you don't have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Unless you are like a lucky human being and you have all of the time in the world to dedicate to this stuff. Most people have other commitments or other people in their lives or jobs or something. And it's like something's got to give. So of course you're going to neglect things like your poor gut-brain axis and your stress management, and you're not going to exercise. You're not going to do those other health promoting things, which in the long run would be very healing, if not curative. And again, it's like either your adrenals or your vagus nerve is fried to a damn crisp, and you can't do anything about it until you allocate some time and some energy into rehabbing that system. And giving it the TLC it needs.
Yeah, 100%. A couple other like just key points. Another just thing to remember too is like a lot of people are just not living their life because they're so wrapped up in the diet piece. So it's not even just like investing time into other like generally healthful practices, but even like connecting with your husband, connecting with your family, like going out and doing things that you enjoy that aren't necessarily, they are health promotive, but we kind of forget about it. But like feeling like you're nourishing you're nourishing your soul, which sounds a little woo woo, but like it's true. You need to have fun. You need to play. Like that oftentimes gets lost in the sauce.
Well, and I remember, you know, I think that we, particularly in America, but I think in the world at large, we have this like bias that we tend to favor things that we can study in a laboratory setting or in a clinical setting. And then like, if it can't be studied, then it must be whatever, like it's not important. And there are just some things that are really hard to study. Like, I think it's Michael Pollan always uses the example, like nutrition is hard to study. You could do it, but it's really tricky because you can't have one person eat broccoli and the next person eat placebo broccoli. Like there's no such thing as placebo broccoli. You know if you're eating it, and you obviously know the difference between like a Pop-Tart and broccoli. So even nutrition, like we have all these great studies that shows nutrition is important, but also it's really hard to get that granular, nuanced view of nutrition because we can't really research some of the specifics. Or like, you know, chiropractic is hard because you can't do a sham adjustment. You can't purposefully adjust somebody the wrong way. You're going to put them in pain, and that's unethical. It would never pass IRB. And that's another one where like it sounds really woo-woo to be like having friends and having healthy relationships is important and anti-inflammatory, but there have been some studies that have tried to look at that, and it does hold up. They've measured inflammatory markers, things like C-reactive protein, and human connectiveness, having good, you know, networks around you and support, and also just feeling like you have a purpose in life and that you're living life for a reason. Those are all profoundly anti-inflammatory. And then that, you know, conversely, I think the opposite is true. If you don't have any friends, or if you never see your friends, or if you're obsessing over the nutrition, you're going to be more inflamed on some level, whether it's something we can measure in blood or if it's something that we don't fully understand yet. It's not promoting your overall health, and it's certainly not going to promote proper motility and microbiome health if you're chronically flamed out because you've been sucked into this rabbit hole and you can't get out.
No, you're 100% accurate. I think there's even studies to linking connection and relationships, healthy relationships, being like one of the number one factors of longevity, which I think is crazy too. So, I mean, it's super critical. I also want to touch on something that's really like near and dear to my heart, because I just see it all the time from a diet space, is just an under eating. So like not getting enough overall calories. I mean, I probably see that in 80, maybe even 90% of the clients that I work with. Dang. So the more restrictions you have in your diet, the higher likelihood you're not getting enough overall nutrition. And if you're not getting enough overall nutrition, it's impossible to heal from anything, really, from any gut-related issue. It's impossible to recover your microbiome. All your hormones will go crazy if you're under eating. Again, your nervous system's not going to function optimally if you're under eating. I kind of view it as like basically the gut shuts down if you're under eating. And it's a process that really feeds on itself, because if you're not getting enough nutrition, it's shutting down digestion, and it makes you not want to eat as much. And then you don't eat as much as you probably should. And then you then have that pain develop again. And then, so it's just this downward spiral that happens all the time. And it's definitely something that I feel like was going on at points of my particular case. And it's always hard to build up calories as well if you've been under eating for a period of time. And a lot of it's not, I want to be clear too, it's not like you're intentionally under eating. Usually you're just doing the best you can with these diets. But I just want to make it really clear that like, if you're not getting enough overall nutrition, it's impossible to move forward from a gut health standpoint.
Well, and you could think of it too, if you think about it just from like more of an evolutionary stance, if we were chronically undernourished back, however many years ago when we were in a tribal setting, then your body would interpret that signal, your brain would interpret that data as assuming, okay, things must be really tough. Like we must not have caught food recently, or, the crops did bad this year, or whatever it is, there's food scarcity. Therefore, I need to go into fight or flight mode, because now it's super important that I can catch the bison, or I can catch the whatever, or I can do whatever. And it's like you get into this really scrambly part of your nervous system where it's just like, crap, what do I do? Crap, what do I do? Yeah. And that's the unconscious part of your brain. That's the sympathetic and parasympathetic side of your nervous system that you have no conscious perception of, you have no conscious control over. So you might think, oh no, I'm not in fight or flight, but the unconscious part of your nervous system tells a different tale. And we can't verbally ask your autonomic nervous system what's up. We could do things like we could try to measure heart rate variability with things like the Oura Ring. We could try to look at it from a data point of view, but that's a part of your brain that can't talk. So just knowing that that's a piece of it, it really sends you into fight or flight, and then rest and digest, that vagus nerve tone just shuts down.
For sure. And I like that you have an Oura Ring. I have an Oura Ring too. Maybe we can nerd out about the Oura Ring sometime.
Twinsies. Ooh, I'll tell you, I have an experiment that I'm planning, actually. I'll tell you about it after. Oh,
cool. Awesome.
Or another time.
I think, again, that's a great way to look at it. You're going to be in fight or flight if you're under eating. So that's another interesting point that you mentioned. Like, a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, I'm not stressed. Like, I don't have much work stress. Like, I feel like I've taken a lot of stress off the table. But there's so many physical stressors, and under eating such a prominent physical stressor from the clients that I work with. Same thing with like nutrient deficiencies. Like, if you have nutrient deficiencies because your diet's so narrow, you're going to have like problems across the board with certain things. You're going to start to develop other symptoms, fatigue. Sometimes people get tingling in their hands, like kind of some weird stuff can pop up if you're getting nutrient depleted. And it's, again, same thing. It's really hard to heal the gut if the gut's not getting enough nutrients to heal either.
And it kind of snowballs away from you.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I see that that's really probably a prominent part of my case, especially I'd say for the first like 4 to 6 months. When I had my SIBO, I was super stressed about my diet, thinking a Brussels sprout was going to cause my gut to implode or something. Yep. Just die. Maybe just die. Yeah, just keel over and give up.
Yeah.
But so I spent all this time on the diet side of things. I was stressed to the max. I wasn't seeing my friends. It just was not conducive to healing at all. And I stayed on it too long. It wasn't helping anymore. So I just think really nourishment is key. And you can still nourish yourself on some restricting certain foods. It just takes really a lot of care and attention. And if your practitioner is kind of like, here, take this list, but isn't looking at what the actual composition of your diet looks like, to me, that's a big red flag. And it's probably important that you find someone that can ensure that you're getting optimal nutrition, especially if your diet's really limited. Again, if it's really limited, I'd work to help create some balance there, but you also want to make sure that you're working with someone that could help really make sure that you're getting enough nutrition. I think that's a big missing piece too in the functional and integrative space. When we're talking about that, I see all the time, people who've been to lots of practitioners, but no one has taken the time to really understand what the low FODMAP diet looks like for that particular person, or what these restrictive diets actually look like. And sometimes they don't even know, like if they're not looking closely, they could miss things like undereating, nutrient deficiency risks, those sorts of things.
And that's the thing too, is like with functional medicine, for example, and I've been to a boatload of seminars and classes and courses, and it's not really part of the conversation. Yeah. We're not trying to be dietitians. We're just, our nutritional angle very frequently is either, maybe some basic things like blood sugar, like don't eat crap, or restrict. And there's, I don't remember, for example, a single functional medicine course that talked about foods that are rich in B12 or foods that are rich in folate. Like, we don't get that. You have to seek that on your own. And even honestly, in my nutritional therapy practitioner certification course, that we didn't really cover that in depth either. We talked about digestion a boatload, but I had to seek that out and get the books and do the research on that kind of stuff more on my own. And I had some of that in undergrad too, but it's, then you have these practitioners who are counseling people on dietary interventions, but they're not actually adequately trained to talk about things like calories and macros and nutrients in foods and like, oh, you're low on B12, add this in. And they're not tracking it often for a reason, because they don't have the proper training in that. And I'm sure that there are some people, who have their CNS or some other credential, but by far and large, that's usually how it shakes out in the functional medicine and largely in the naturopathic medicine field, from what I've seen.
Yeah, no, totally. I 100% agree. Again, if you're not confident in a particular strategy, I don't think you're going to bring it up or really focus on it when working with someone.
Which in a way is good. Because, you don't want somebody to counsel you on something that they're not an expert in.
Exactly.
But if it's ignored and it's never brought up that, oh, hey, this is a thing, and I can't help you, but maybe somebody else could. That's where I kind of get cringy, because at least acknowledging, oh, hey, meal planning is really rad. And I'll tell people, I don't do meal planning because I don't know what you like. I don't know. I'm not going to find you recipes and write it all, because I don't know what you like to eat. So I can give you the tools, and I can help you interpret, a food diary and do that. But I try to tell people where my expertise is and is not. And I don't know if that conversation is happening as much as it should in my profession.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think with the meal, I'm with you too with meal planning. I'm not a huge meal planner. I think sometimes it keeps you stuck too. Like there should be more evolution in your diet than like sticking to this meal plan for 6 months. So I'm not I don't do meal plans typically unless like I felt like someone needed like some sort of template. Maybe we could work on something. But yeah, I mean, I wish too there was more dietitians that really understood the in-depths of the gut too, because I think a lot of people will go to like a dietitian, but then they don't understand like what's going on gut-wise. So there's sort of a clash. So that definitely happens too, but I do wish there was more collaboration from a diet standpoint with some of these functional providers. Because I honestly think from my clients, it's like the number one mistake that's really holding them back is just not getting enough nutrition as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, it can be a deal breaker. And I will say too, to kind of start wrapping up, I do want to throw my profession a little bit of a bone too, because I know I've been harsh on, the functional medicine space. I do functional medicine, so it's not like I'm really crapping on the profession entirely. It's just these are common things that I've seen either from patients who have come to see me or seeing people on professional forums or talking to people at seminars and conferences and just what I've seen. But I will say, I think I understand some of why the functional world is so keen to get people into this food fear. It's not intentional, usually, but sometimes I think it is intentional. And it's because we've all had patients, and I don't know if you've really seen this necessarily yourself, but like I know for me, before I really hunkered down and did gut stuff, and I was like really clear on what I'm good at and what I prefer to not work with, I had some of these patients who, the only way to say it is I think I cared more about their health than they did on some level. And it's so deeply frustrating. I remember, there was a kid with pandas with an autoimmunity to his brain, and he was having behavioral issues and health issues and chronic strep throat, chronic ear infections. And I literally brought up, cut out dairy, maybe. Like if you're a phlegm factory and you've got ear infections and nose stuff, like I can almost bet you're going to be sensitive to dairy. And, the kid was like 12, so he was old enough to kind of get it. You would have thought I asked the mom and the kid to chop off his left arm, throw it in a fire, barbecue it, and then eat it.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating because I'm like, I know in my heart of hearts that this can help you and you're not doing it. Or I've had those patients where similarly, like woman with like 5 autoimmune diseases, and I'm like, go gluten-free? Obviously, I'm much more professional than that in the session, but it's literally like, can you go gluten-free? And at that time, like I remember, I was like, you could eat a gluten-free Pop-Tart. I don't care. I don't even want to worry about like nutrients. I just want you to restrict this one thing. Just buy the gluten-free crap food. I don't even care. Just go gluten-free. No, you would think that I asked her to go to Mars and back and then barbecue her own eyeball. And there are those cases where like, no matter what, even if people are very sick, you can't get them to listen. And it's so deeply frustrating where I'm just like tearing my hair out. And thankfully I haven't had a case like that in a number of years because now like I've really honed in on more of what I enjoy working with, and I screen people before they work with me much more thoroughly. But at the time, I had those moments where I was like I almost want to up the ante and tell people like, you could have another autoimmune disease and it could be MS and you could die. And like you almost want to scare the shit out of people to get them to listen and do the things that will help them. And I think that oftentimes people in the functional medicine space, integrative medicine, naturopathic medicine, they get enough of those cases, or they do that with their own family, like try to get their mom to go gluten-free and there's resistance. And I think they've been met with enough resistance that they're just so deeply frustrated that then their normal programming becomes, I have to scare people.
Yeah.
And it's not good. I get it a little bit, but it's not good.
Yeah, I could see that happening for sure. And I do think I sort of, and I think probably you're at this point too, expect some level of commitment from your clients that you're working, like the level of commitment because you've honed down on what your key clients or what kind of your your target clients are at this point have been honed, and a lot of the ones that aren't necessarily committed are weeded out. So that's, I think, a good step, and I think makes the process a lot better. But I totally get what you're saying. I do think that a lot of practitioners aren't really seeing the downstream effects of it. Like, I mean, for me, again, I'm a dietitian, so I can very much see like kind of disordered eating patterns that people are in. They've really messed up their relationship with food. I just think there's a lack of a conversation around it too. Again, to me, it tends to be boiled down to like, okay, these foods you eliminate, these foods you can have, but there's no other conversation around the diet angle, and then that becomes like the only lever that they're pulling on. And unfortunately, again, a lot of times like there's a limited rate of return, like we talked about earlier on eliminating certain foods. So I totally get what you're saying, and I think there can be a frustration if, like, you know, someone's not doing necessarily what you think would really help them, and so sometimes you do have to do like a tough love approach, but scaring the daylights out of them, oh man, I just wouldn't advise any practitioner to do that at this point.
Well, or even like, you know, maybe there are those couple of people that really need to be scared. You know, for whatever reason. Maybe there's a few of those. But I think a lot of people, especially if they're chronically unwell, they have autoimmunity, they have a condition like SIBO or IBS, it's like they're already usually a little bit more towards that fight or flight response, and their adrenals are already a little crispy just because they've been chronically unwell. So it could be really tricky nudging people further towards that metaphorical cliff edge where they just lapse into full-blown, you know, restricted eating or binging and like not healthy stuff. Again, I can see there's been a couple of times in my career where I've been really tempted to scare the bejesus out of somebody, and I don't have that in me to do that, but I kind of got it in those moments. But most of my patients I see, they're already terrified, and they're already Googling. And they're already, you know, they're in like 57 Facebook groups about IBS or SIBO or stool testing. And everybody has a different opinion. And everybody swears that this one thing was a miracle for them. And these things are horrible for everybody with this condition. And it's just, everybody's so confused and befuddled. And it's
quick
tough.
Tip. I think a quick tip would be to be careful with those forums. I think they can definitely...
As part of my treatment plans, oftentimes I will recommend that people unfollow them.
Yeah,
me too. And then, you know, you can refer to them every now and then, but like every time I prescribe something, I don't necessarily want you going in that forum because, like you said with food, every single food on planet Earth, somebody's going to tell you it's bad.
Yeah.
You know, oh, strawberries, oh, they're high in histamine and high in sugar, you can't eat strawberries. It's a freaking strawberry.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, maybe my patients with mast cell disease or overt histamine intolerance, but like, there's always a reason for every food to be unhealthy. You know, spinach has oxalates, whatever it might be. And if you search on those forums, you will find at least one person who says that every supplement, every probiotic, or every food is horrible and you should never take it. And you know, if you're basing your view of the world and your view of your health on all of these voices in a forum, it just gets really confusing and frustrating, and it's a very inefficient way to go about healing. And I would argue it actually holds people back 99% of the time. And those forums should probably be burned to the ground, honestly.
I mean, I think, again, the intention's good, but I think from my standpoint, it's really impossible to move forward from a gut health standpoint if you don't believe you're going to get better, or you don't have confidence in the practitioner that you're working with. Again, if you don't, then I definitely suggest switching. Or like, again, maybe discussing with your practitioner what you're kind of uncomfortable about and getting their take on it and making sure your concerns are met. But I think if you're having doubts and your concerns and it's driving you to do all this research, again, that's sort of setting you up to fail almost. I really do think that in order to move forward in a gut health space, you have to have strong belief that it's going to happen, and you have to have hope. And going down those rabbit holes on those forums tend to be very hopeless and plant a lot of seeds of doubt. So,
yeah, and I would say too, like, generally speaking, 99% of the time, the people who are in those forums are not well yet. So they might not be the people that you want to take advice from. And I mean that absolutely with love. Like you said, it's, you know, the intention is good, and it can be a valuable asset at times. And it's not that it's without total value, even though I just said burn them to the ground. But yeah, it's really tough. And I'm in a lot of forums, and you know, I'll see in the SIBO forums or the IBS forums, I will see these desperate posts where people say, has anybody cured their SIBO? Has anybody recovered? I need some hope. Like, I need a story. And like all the posts in here are people who are still sick. And it's like these pleas for help. Like, can it be done? And I think it's oftentimes people scroll through those groups, or they ping pong to doctors, and they just get so hopeless. And there's this feeling of like, crap, am I going to have SIBO forever? Am I going to have IBS forever? There's no hope. And I actually just started, I'm kind of new to Instagram, but I just started a series, there's a hashtag now I created for IBS success stories and SIBO success stories. And I'm just posting about some of the people that I've worked with and how they've recovered. But I want to put it out there that you can absolutely heal from IBS or SIBO or both, or just motility or GERD. Like, all of these things can be healed to one degree or another, or completely. It's just, if you're going there to a group, the people who are still getting notifications from that group and the people who are following it in their newsfeed, 99.9% of them are still sick, and that's why they're still in the group. The people who are well turn off their notifications, or they leave the group because they don't need it anymore.
That's a really good point. And then you get like this really strong, I think that basically though feeds off of, like, if you're just going in that group and seeing just the people that you know that have SIBO in that group and they're all unwell, like, to me, again, it just fills lots of seeds of doubt. So I love that you're sharing a lot of your SIBO success stories. I'm the same way. I mean, I recovered from SIBO. I think you probably had SIBO. My clients move forward and recover from their SIBO. I mean, it's 100% possible, and it doesn't have to be with these insane restrictions.
No.
And sometimes the insane restrictions are actually preventing you from getting better.
Exactly.
There needs to be a very strong, and I see it a little bit. I do see a paradigm shift happening in the gut health space where more practitioners are sort of talking a little bit more about reintroduction and adding in fibers and things like that, which is all great. I just think it's really important to note that, like, a lot of the popular protocols, especially dietary protocols, I don't think they've proven really, like, helpful in terms of getting long-term relief from gut issues. Just from my anecdotal evidence working with clients. Yeah.
And I think the tides are turning gradually. It's not fast enough, but it is starting to happen. And I think, if nothing else, as an example, when I first started studying functional medicine, 10, 11 years ago, Karazian had his courses through Apex Energetics, which were astounding, but they didn't have a gut course. They had a thyroid course, a brain course, a blood chemistry course, and an endocrinology course. And I always thought it was weird that they didn't have a gut course specifically. And so I kind of went into, things like stool testing, and it was like I had to learn it as I went along. And now, to his credit, years later, like only, last year, Dietitian Karazian came out with, he has his gut health course through the Karazian Institute, and he's got, I think some sort of program that individual people can do, like an online course or something.
Yeah.
And he's really taken a turn only in the last year or two, to the best of my knowledge, where he's really talking about diversity of plant fibers and trying to diversify the diet and not doing restricted eating. But the irony is, I remember him being a very strong proponent of food sensitivity testing and eliminating all the things, and the Repairvite diet that Apex certainly promoted then. I don't know if they do it as much now. That was what I did when I was trying to heal my gut. I did the Repairvite diet, which was basically AIP before it was called AIP.
Yeah.
So I am seeing the tides turn a bit, even in the last 10 years or so, which I'm very grateful for. But there's certainly a lot of experts in the field that are still advocating these very restricted diets. And there's the echo chamber that is these Facebook groups and these forums. And it could be rough because there's a lot of conflicting information out there. But I'm glad that we are telling the tales of what we've seen clinically and helped people with. And again, diversifying the diet has helped so many of my patients.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Can't recommend it enough. But that being said, I think that might be a good place to wrap up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you could take a moment and rate us on iTunes or your podcasting device. If you can like this video, follow us on YouTube, drop a comment down in the doobly-doo below. We would love to know, what topics do you think we should cover in future podcasts? We are totally open-minded to getting suggestions, but if you could rate us, subscribe, or like the video, that would be tremendously helpful, and then we can help other people and reach them as well. Thank you so much, Amy. In the next video, I can't wait to see you again. That's a wrap.